In fact, after actions, including Israel's Turkish ships that.
Okay, so we'll begin. Tuesday, March 8th was International Women's Day. And we're very, very happy to have with us a woman I admire very much this week. Judie Bopp is a co-founder and director of Four World Center for Development Learning. She has worked in Asia, the South Pacific, Africa, the USSR, the Caribbean, and in many Indigenous communities in North America, including Central America, I think. And many years ago, in the early 90s, I made a trip to, just as it was changing from the Soviet Union to what came after, I traveled with Michael and Judie Bopp, and it was very special to me to have that journey with them. Judie is a Baha'i, but she is of Mennonite background, and her mother and father were actually have their roots in Ukraine. And Judie worked on projects in Ukraine from, I think you said 1997 to almost 2007. So she has a great deal of experience and a lot of, certainly a lot of memories and thoughts of being in places that we are now seeing in the news so tragically. So Judie, thank you so much for joining us. And we're really looking forward to the topic of today. How can we use a language that promotes peace? So thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Linda, and lovely to see you and all the rest of the people. You know, we lived in the Slocan Valley long ago. That's our son, who surprisingly to us turned 50 this year. You know, it's a shock when you have kids that age. He was born there, and we lived near Perry Siding. So the area that I'm seeing all of you being in is something that's also very dear to my heart. I want to start actually with a story from someplace other than Ukraine. Zambia in Africa. We got a phone call one night in the middle of the night. You know, sometimes people don't think about time zones. So it was the middle of the night, and this person said, well, I work with CARE International in Zambia, and we've got a situation. We've been working with the peri-urban settlements, meaning those settlements that are not formal places around the capital. So they're squatter settlements, but they've got huge populations that are living in situations where they don't have really regular infrastructure, and people are struggling just to meet their daily living needs. So CARE International was working there, and they were helping to build water systems in schools and have some kind of security presence and so on there. But the government, the municipal government of Lusaka, the capital, contacted them and said, that's it, you can't work anymore. We're cutting you off. And they were devastated because they had all these ongoing projects. They had development councils and all these settlements and so on. They were devastated. And they said, can you help fix this? So, right, we say, right, yes, Superman. We said, no, actually, we can't fix this, but we'll work with you to try to find a way forward. And as we talked to them, what seemed to be the situation was that the municipal government was concerned that all the resources of the project of CARE, which, you know, is a huge international presence, philanthropic organization, were going to these informal settlements, and none of it was going to the municipal government that was struggling with a lot of the issues that come out of those settlements, issues around poverty and crime and so on. And so they wanted the projects to be officially through the municipal council. So that's what we understood when we began untangling what was happening there. And the CARE International was saying, we don't trust the government. You know, we cut them in here and they'll just use all, it's corruption. They'll just use the money for things that it's not meant for, you know, we'll lose control. So there was kind of a stalemate there, a real challenge in terms of and who's caught in the middle and who's suffering is the people. So what do? Well, what we suggested to them is that we set up a kind of a participatory action research process. We would bring together people from the municipality with people from CARE and people from the communities. And we would say, we started out by saying, you know, we really don't know the way out and we don't understand this whole context, but let's learn together. Let's go in and sit with people in these communities, just sit under the tree, just talk to people about their context, about their life, what's going on. And let's really find out what we all should be doing to make a difference, because the municipal government is saying they want to make a difference and CARE is saying they want to make a difference. Let's do this together. So they agreed, and we set up little teams of, there would be a representative from the municipal government, there'd be a representative from CARE, there would be some of the activists from the communities, and we'd go and we would just sit in these settlements and talk to people and ask them what was going on and what they thought would make a difference. And then every evening after spending the day that way, we would meet in the office of the CARE and say, well, what did we learn today? What is this telling us for what we should do to move forward? And, you know, it was very interesting. What came out of it was that as we learned together, people began to see that neither of the entrenched positions were really going to make the change that was needed to be made. In the end, what people came to was that we needed a new municipal government act that would figure out how to do this kind of work for the municipalities and how to share with the philanthropic organizations. So that was the proposal, and we said, well, now it's time for everybody to come together in one place. And the CARE people are saying, no, we can't do that, because the last time we tried to do that, we just ended up shouting at each other and it was a disaster. And we said, well, do you trust us? Can we do this? We think we can do this. And they said, oh, okay, but we're telling you it's going to be a disaster. But anyway, so we all got together, and it was just the first thing, you know, we were the only two, you know, little old white people in the room. What do you do? How do you start? How do you promote this dialogue that now needs to happen? Well, they began the meeting, as they begin all meetings, with singing their national anthem. It's a beautiful, beautiful song about brotherhood, about high aspirations. And when they were finished, we just said to them, do you believe that song? And they were kind of, you know, surprised that we would say that. And there was this silence, and then people said, we'd like to, yeah, we would like to believe this song. We would like this song to be our reality. And just at that moment, the back door of the hotel where we were meeting burst open, and two of the municipal councillors, very imposing men, came in. And we found out later they had deliberately been late because they wanted to disrupt this meeting. They didn't want this kind of consensus to emerge. They wanted their own view to win, And so they came in and they're all, Madam Chairman, they're saying to me, this huge imposing, Madam Chairman, I propose this and I this and that, I that. And it's like, there was this silence and somebody, another municipal council that had been there earlier said, brother, sit down. We're like two wings of a bird here. We have to listen to each other. So the other two councillors were so shocked, they just sat down. And what emerged from that meeting, I just, one image that I'll never forget is they're sitting at small tables and they're talking about what would be the parameters of this new local government act that would make the possibility of this kind of change. And one of the community activists stands up and shakes the hand of the municipal councillor that's in his group and says, I think I like you now. It was like, what a precious moment. So, when I think about that experience, what happened there? Well, the first thing is that we had to ask other people to put aside their biases, because there were these deep biases, government bad, NGO greedy, and so on. There was these deep biases. And then we had to encourage everyone to assume that people are actually coming from a good place. Everybody's coming from a good place. There may be angry words coming out of their mouth, but actually it comes from a deep place of caring. So then we were coming with different sort of sets of understanding of information. And so we had to find a way to investigate this together and to come to a common understanding of what really was the truth of what is happening. And we had to keep talking about what we learned rather than jumping into immediately saying, what should we do? Because what should we do is deeply rooted in opposing points of view. But if we talked about what are we learning and what does that tell us for how we should move forward, a whole different conversation came about. And then the whole idea of having a values principle foundation that we could recognize. And that came fortuitously out of that national anthem, that beautiful song about brotherhood and service. And then keep talking as we try to reach consensus. So these are some of the things that I learned going through this experience. It's not like, we had this grand certainty moving into this situation about what would happen, but we had a kind of belief that the process would take us there. And the next day we walked into the offices of the municipal councillors, and the two guys that came tonight stood up and they started laughing and they kissed us on both cheeks and said, you totally destroyed us. And they were ready, to talk about how this could move forward. So now I just want to tell a little story about Ukraine. When I started working there, it was a civil society project. So it was working at how citizens, ordinary people, could start to build the social infrastructure that they needed in order to improve their lives. The Soviet Union had a system which had been very centralized, was gone, and the most vulnerable people in the country no longer had those kind of safety nets that had been there. So I was in Odessa, and I just remember meeting with a group of women there who were all had children with disabilities. And we met in this classroom. And so they're squeezed into these little desks, and they see these foreigners, and they just sit there with their heads down weeping because they don't see any opportunity for themselves to have agency in this situation. Most of them are now single because their husbands left them, given the fact that they had given birth to a child with disabilities. And they did not know how they would make a living. And so they were weeping. And all you want to do at that point is to just empty your pockets of all the rubles that you have. But when I thought about it, I actually didn't have very many. And it would have only made a tiny difference for a very short time. What would that really have achieved? So again, this idea that you have to start a conversation, start a dialogue about how we could work together in a developmental way. So then there's a workshop that brought together people there in Odessa. These people from these women, people from Lviv, people from Kiev. Now Odessa is quite Russified. People there speak Russian. Many of them don't even speak Ukrainian, and a lot of ambivalence in their mind about Ukraine as a nation, and so on. So these people though have come together because they somehow believe in this idea that civil society has to rise up and make a difference for the most vulnerable people. So we're in this room and we're just starting, and we're doing a energizer, get to know each other exercise, and the back door bursts open and this woman comes in, and behind her, she has a microphone, and behind her is her cameraman. And she comes in and she starts saying, "What are you doing here, you people? You're dupes of the West," and so on. I don't even understand it at first, but I have an interpreter Sashko, a dear Sashko, who is helping me understand what she's saying. And she's very aggressive and angry sort of tone of voice. And everybody's looking and saying, under their breath, "Judie, do something." And I'm saying, "Me? Why me? I don't understand the language. I'm just new here. You folks live here. You do something." But, it was a time when I didn't really think, but just acted from the heart. And I said to my interpreter, who was quite hostile about Russia, I said, "Sashka, say what I say." And I put him under my arm and said, "Just say what I say," because I thought he would just blow up, And I started walking towards this woman little by little, and I said, "You must care so much about your country for you to come in here like this and to say what you're saying. This means you must care so much about your country and for your people." And she looks at me like that's not what she expected. And little by little, I edged closer and closer to her until we're about this far apart, just within that zone of where you could be comfortable, where you're not going to jump back when somebody else enters into your space. And I guess just kept talking to her in this tone, and she just started really just looking at me. And then she said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And she and her cameraman walked out the door. And I understood later she wrote she did a pretty good little piece on this workshop that was happening in Odessa. But again, what was happening there, without having the chance to think about it, I tried to move from a place of empathy and understanding that really why was she there? Not to yell at me and everybody else, but she was there because she did have, I chose to believe that she did have a deep care and a deep response and a deep intention, and appealing to this common value that we had. We all cared about these people. We all cared about the country, and just demonstrating relationship by coming into her almost to the point where I could touch her arm. And, it was, for me, obviously, it was a profound experience, because here I am talking about it, 20 years later, or more than 20 years later, here I am talking about it. But there's something in that establishing relationship from the heart that makes it possible to move a conversation. So how are we doing for time? Am I really moving too slow? I'm okay, Linda? Because I just wanted to tell one other story. You know, when we started out working with Four Worlds, we were working at the University of Lethbridge in a curriculum project for Indigenous people, for Indigenous schools. And at that time, this is way back in the early 1980s, at that time, what kind of presence did Indigenous people have in the Alberta curriculum or the British Columbia curriculum, as you think about it from your perspective, but in the Alberta curriculum, there was a couple of poorly mimeographed sheets of paper that had a teepee on them that people could color. That was about it. And so now we had written this whole curriculum from an Indigenous point of view, using Indigenous stories and so on. It was called Walking with Grandfather, and there was another one called The Sacred Tree for high school, and so on. It was a whole different approach and a whole different inclusion. Did the Alberta Department of Education, were they interested in this? Were they happy about this? No, they were not. You know, they were giving us a hard time all the time about this, and they refused to use the materials and so on. So then we heard that the head of Indigenous education in Alberta was coming to visit our project. And what did all the guys do? They had found an excuse to be somewhere else. Nobody wanted to talk to him. You know, he was the enemy. So I was left there alone with this guy. But what do you do? Now, I knew something about him, and that was that he had had a heart attack not that long ago. And so I said something to him about that, and he said, my heart is already getting cold and stiff because I have to make poor decisions that I don't think are right about Indigenous people. So my heart is already breaking. And this was like, wow. After 3 minutes, this is the conversation that he and I are having about the difficulty that he was in, the pressure that he was in, and how it was affecting him, and could share about our perspective and what we were trying to do and so on. And just a whole nother conversation, it arose. And again, it really wasn't planned. It just came from a connection of the heart. So what have I learned from these experiences, and how did they relate to the fact that you may be sitting with somebody who has a totally different standpoint than you have about COVID, or about all of the other really things that are in our society now, Indigenous people, just different understandings about the economy and about poverty. You know, we know people who say it's just their own damn fault, you know, if people are poor and so on. So how do you have a conversation in those situations? Well, just say here some of the things that come to my mind about it is, as I said, you know, you start out, even though you could be wrong, you start out presuming good intentions. That person, even though their standpoint to you seems as screwball as can be, or dangerous, or whatever is your thought, assume good intentions, and then try really in your heart to feel a sense of love and a recognition of unity. You know, we're just now working on a project in the Yukon with the courts there, and it has to do with their domestic violence treatment option courts, redesigning the program for that. And when we're speaking to some of the counselors who are working with these individuals who have done really tragic and bad things, is they're saying, unless we as counselors start from a place of love, we're useless. Regardless of what this person has done, we start from a place of love. So somehow finding that capacity, that possibility of unity whether it's with that other person or within the organization that you're struggling to work with, whatever the situation is. And that can mean taking a hard look at our own biases. You know, as I said, that when that individual from Alberta Education came walking in, I had a bias. And many of these other situations, you know. So looking at our own biases and then seeking to find ways to express that point of unity. Like, what is the underlying question that we're really talking about? Not the question where we're fighting, but what's underneath it? What's the underlying question that we're talking about? And that's brought us into this space of this. Now, I could tell you many stories of times when I totally missed it. You know, I was sitting in our pharmacy to having just gotten a flu shot years ago, and you're supposed to sit there for 10 minutes. And this other individual who had gotten a shot came and sat beside us, and he starts talking about Muslims. And he said, you know, don't trust them because they may pretend to be friends, but they're just waiting to kill you. This is what this person actually told me. You know, and did I respond as well as I could? I'm afraid not. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying this is easy, but I'm saying, you know, what was going on there? If I could have really listened empathetically to understand what was going on there, maybe we could have had a better conversation than we did. So what has brought him to that point of view? What is the fear there? And how can we come to an understanding that we both have a common concern of some kind? And then ask sincere questions rather than jumping to the point of saying, well, this is what the situation is, this is what's right, etc., etc. Ask sincere questions. Listen with curiosity and empathy. It's like Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand and then to be understood. So questions are really, really important. And then sometimes you can paraphrase what you're hearing. So if I understand what you're saying is, and you demonstrate the fact that you're really listening and that you're really hearing, using yourself when you speak to use I language. And what I mean by I language is rather than saying you this, you that, you're wrong, you should do this, you say, well, in my experience, or this is what I understand, or so on. You're using I language rather than you language. If you can avoid you language through the whole conversation, that's a good idea. Then when you do speak from the heart, give your ideas humbly, and with the understanding that you might well change your mind if you really listen and really hear. You might come to a different understanding. You might shift your opinions or ideas when you really hear what other people have to say. Once you've given your idea, it's not yours anymore. You've given it freely to the circle or to the individual that you're speaking with. So you don't have to hold on to it. You don't have to defend it. Chances are you're going to shift a little in your understanding. And so in this way, avoid giving or taking offense. It's really easy when somebody is speaking in an aggressive tone to feel offended, but it doesn't help. So if you can avoid taking offense and giving offense, then try to find some points of consensus. Is there something that you're hearing that you can really agree on, that you can really support, and articulate what you understand those points of consensus to be. Now, you might not even come to a point of common understanding. That can often happen in a conversation, but you can acknowledge the contribution still of those other people, that individual or those that group or whatever, the contribution that they've made to seeking a common understanding. And you can acknowledge their courage, being willing to have that conversation, to say what they feel. Often that does take courage, and one of the reasons why the speech is so strident is because because of that kind of fear and having courage to overcome that and speak. If you can find any common ground in terms of values, hopes, fears, principles, like what are the principles here that would lead us to a good decision? So principles, we might mean if we don't act in unity, then we won't get anywhere. That's a principle. So are there principles that you can articulate or values? So Michael encouraged me just to close with this other story, and it comes from, it's an old story from New Mexico, from the olden days, and it was a time of drought. It was a terrible time. Nothing had grown. The harvests had all burned up. It had, in fact, been drought for years. And this is something that the world is facing too, that it had been a drought for years. People were hungry, they were afraid, they were angry, they were distressed, they were blaming each other. If you hadn't done X, then this wouldn't be happening, and so on. And they were fighting about what should be done. They had lots of meetings. They came in together in the church and they talked about it, but they couldn't come to any understanding. And in fact, more often than not, it just ended up with animosity. So the mayor and the town council come together and they're thinking, what do? We have to do something. And somebody said, well, I heard about this guy. He's called the Rainmaker. And they say that he can make it rain. So we should ask him. We should try to get him to come here and make it rain. And everybody's saying, well, yeah, maybe, what would it cost? And who is this guy anyway? But in the end, they decided they'd give it a shot. And so they called out however the communication system worked, sending out the message to the Rainmaker that they wanted him to come. And meanwhile, people are still feeling, well, this is a stupid idea. We can't afford it. It's not going to work, whatever. But one day they notice on the top of the hill, there's this lone man on a black horse dressed all in black. And he's come. It must be the Rainmaker. And he slowly rides into the village, and everybody comes out of their homes to see who this is and what this is and so on. And they said, you're the Rainmaker? He said, yes, I am. Can you make it rain? That's the big question. And what's it going to cost? Well, he charged $5,000. That's a lot of money. A long time ago, $5,000. And he said, yes, but I need you to pay me in advance, and I need you to give me a quiet place to be until I can do what I need to do. And so they did. What choice did they have? They were still apprehensive, but what choice did they have? And so they gave him a house on the edge of the village, was a little cabin, and they brought him food, and then they left him alone. And he's in there and he's thinking, he saw what was happening in that village, how the people were torn apart, how they were fighting, how the fear and the pain and the hard times were wearing them down and making them hard times making hard people. And he had seen that. And he knew that nothing could happen in the positive until that was somehow healed. But how would he do that? And as he thought about it, he thought about his own life and about the people that he had hurt in his life. He had a woman somewhere who he had deserted, neglected. He had a fight with his father long, long time ago. And it ended in bitter words. and so on. And he thought about all these things in his own life that were really a mirror of what was happening in the village. And he knew what he had to do. He had to look inside and he had to heal those hurts before anything could happen. And so he went into himself, he went into his process, and he called out, you know, in his spirit to understand, to forgive, and to ask for forgiveness for his own life, for his own things that he had done. And that he was like that all night in that spirit, in that space. And just as he had finished his prayers and opened his eyes, you could hear the raindrops falling on the roof. And he came out of the house, and all the people from the village had come out. You know, it was just barely morning, and they had come out in whatever, their nightgowns or whatever, and they were dancing in the rain and singing and laughing. So, the Rainmaker, does it have something to tell us about how we heal those divides that we have in society that are causing such difficulty in terms of us being able to work together, to come to one heart and one mind, to make a difference in those issues that we really care about that are troubling the world?
Ooh.
Your turn.
I just have a question. The people that you worked with seemed, that even though they had different sides, they seemed to be able to come to some kind of an agreement. And I personally have not had these experiences, but when I listen to some people and some things that are happening these days, it seems like some of these people, like say the ones that are against masking or whatever, those kind of things, like in that convoy, they actually are willing to do violent things to get their way. And I wonder, how can you work with somebody like that?
I don't think you can always work with somebody. I don't think there's always an easy way, but I think that, like I say, I've often missed it. I've often missed my opportunity when things are really like in the middle of war. Can you somehow talk them out of it? Probably not, but you can. There are people always on the, I don't want to say fringes, but I don't know what other word to use, but there are always people that are vulnerable to change and to growth. And when we look at how changes have happened in the world, we talk about the end of slavery, we talk about the women's movement, we talk about the whole idea of human rights. How did those happen? They didn't happen from government. They happened because enough people put aside whatever it was, that their own backgrounds, their own fears, their own whatever, and decided this is worth that to us. It's worth coming out of our own corners and working together, because that's the only way that things are going to change. And sometimes really unlikely bedfellows work together on something. So we work with what we have, where we can make a difference, and we help and hope that circle can grow enough to impact the whole system. I don't, maybe other people have answers to that question. It's a good question.
Judy,
Yes.
I was wondering if you had follow-up from those situations, you know, where you saw a turning point in terms of how it lasted or how long, you know, it had that effect when you were able to turn things around with the people you were working with.
Yeah, and I would say I didn't turn it around. They turned it around. But, you know, the whole project, for example, that I was talking about in Ukraine, it was a 10-year project and amazing things happened. You know, the next time I saw those, well, not the next time, but years later, I saw those women from Odessa we had an international conference at the end of this project. And there they were, you know, with their freshly ironed blouses and skirts and making this, their heads were up. They were talking about what they had done. They had started businesses, they had started not-for-profit or service organizations. They had found ways to unite and work together rather than feel separate and alone and not agency. Yeah, it was night and day in terms of how these women looked and what their understanding of their own agency, their own capacity to remake their world. That's an example. I mean, it was stellar what I saw in them, and you know, also not just with those women from Odessa, but with the project in general, how people from Donetsk, from Kharkiv, from Lviv were working together. And does that have an impact on what's happening now in terms of the tremendous upsurging of people working together in Ukraine? I mean, it's crazy what you're hearing that people are doing. Well, no, it wasn't just this project, but a whole bunch of other things. But all those things add up to that kind of a difference. And I've seen the same kind of a thing happening in other places as well. So I would take heart. I think some of those things are lasting, and have things changed for education in terms of Indigenous students? Yeah, some. They have. Is there still a lot of way to go? Yes. But it's not what it was like in 1982.
And the nice thing is they've seen that success and they grow from that too, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Maxine.
So any other thoughts? Anybody else would like to say something? There's JJ. You have to unmute.
Mhm.
I just want to thank Judy for her sharing those stories, because yeah, particularly in Europe and especially Ukraine, that's real close, and yeah, it's very difficult not to be aggressive in a volatile environment. But I guess why you were able to make an impact just from hearing your story was you sought common ground and you demonstrated respect for the human dignity of the other, and they felt it. I guess we have to learn to do more of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've seen this happen, you know. I'm just telling my own stories because that's what I know and what I can speak from. But I think that there are amazing You know, if we just go by what we hear on the radio, we miss where change is happening. I think change is happening on the ground, is happening with people in small ways that somehow reach a tipping point and something big changes. And so holding on to that can be tough, especially, you know, now sometimes we see things and it feels really tough. I look at a picture, you know, on my news feed from Lviv, for example, and I see people lining up at the bank, and I know exactly where they are. I see a bench, and I know that bench, you know, and it's not easy to see those things, but the human spirit is strong.
I wonder, Judie, if I could speak, and I'm not going to put my video on because sometimes weird things happen, and
Sure.
I don't want to lose the thread here. This is Natasha speaking, and I just really want to thank you for what you have shared today, because it is so urgently needed. Just today, in the course of my day, I spoke with 3 people about, we understand that peace has to begin with us, each one of us as individuals.
Yeah.
But it's a tall order when we get upset or triggered or angry with people who are coming from such a different place, and they can be aggressive and pushy and intrusive and come with a big energy. So we were just discussing this today in 3 different situations. And I really appreciate the concrete ideas you gave to that end of how to talk with other people. My question to you, though, is there things that you do personally so that you can come into those conversations from a place of compassion, and, you know, put your biases aside and have that space between space around you and within you that can engage in those kind of conversations? Is my question clear, kind of?
Sure, Natasha. Yeah. Well, I don't know, certainly don't have an easy answer, but I think one of the things that's made a difference for me is the 35 years or more that I've worked with Canadian Indigenous communities. And the way that the circle works, the talking circle, the circle works, is a discipline that you learn through sitting in thousands of hours in talking circles. And the rules are very simple, really, in a way. Keep your feet flat on the floor, you know, keep centered, keep grounded, and love the person that's speaking. While that person is speaking, you don't have you have to shut down the rebuttal mode, because you can easily have a whole conversation going about what you're going to say when it's your turn, which is a kind of rebuttal. And the rules in the talking circle are very clearly that you speak from your own point of view. You don't speak as a rebuttal to somebody else. And you listen when somebody else is speaking. You don't think about what your own self. And so that discipline has been, I would say, very helpful to me over the years of just practicing that. And so coming into a situation, if I can remember to do that, keep my feet on the floor, listen, shut off the rebuttal, love, and so on, then that's what helps me.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. and I can really appreciate that 35 years of sitting in circle would certainly be a supportive training for this kind of work. A lot of the people I've been talking to feel that there's some urgency. We don't have 35 years to, you know, experience that. So but I appreciate sort of the nuggets that you shared, that can we incorporate those things regardless of not having 35 years. And that is, you know, really respectful listening and staying grounded. So thank you very much.
Well, yes, it'd be lovely to meet you sometime, Natasha.
Yes, I would love that.
I see you behind the black box there.
Well, if I might try, but I might lose the whole thing here.
Yeah, no,
That's happened to me before.
It's fine.
Thank you, Judy.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak or has a comment or a story?
Yeah, a contribution, an idea. Are you usually so quiet at these things?
Have you been in really animated Zoom meetings before? I think we still struggle with Zoom meetings. It's not the same as sitting around the living room or the dining room table.
Well, no, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Shelley, finish up.
Oh, no, I'm done. You go ahead, Brent.
Well, I was just thinking, we live in a culture of contest. And when we turn on the news, debating seems to be the order of the day.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's members of parliament or whatever, we have to stop debating and we have to start listening. And like Judy was saying, how the circle works. Just a thought. I mean, and we're not used to that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to work on that, and I'm sure we'll get results.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have a lot of prominent role models for this kind of listening. As you say, Parliament, many other contexts are adversarial. Courts, our court system, our laws are adversarial.
Yeah, it's a cause of disunity. It's not unifying.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. I'm sorry I was late to getting this one, but I was on another thing which started earlier. And then I got to this as soon as that ended. But my question is, in any of the online meetings I've been in the last couple of months, which has been wonderful to keep connected with people, what I find is a similar proportion of men and women as we see here. And with the Baha'i sense of balancing the importance of the male and the female, I'm wondering what can be done to have a better balance at places like this. The women seem to be right out there in numbers, and the men serious and committed, but much fewer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do any of you men here have an idea about that?
When we're speaking about culture, of course I can't speak for all men, but white men in North America have grown up in a culture. A lot of us have grown up in a culture of competition, quick gratification, and camaraderie and other stuff. The word compassion don't really fit. You almost need a shoehorn. And so, yeah, we have to change our culture, and we're being forced to change it. When Natasha and Judy were speaking about 35 years in the circle. I guess it all depends on how you look at the glass. 35 years could be a long time. We may have it as little as 35 minutes.
Mhm.
And that's the nature of our culture. And we have to turn that around. So yeah, we need to practice changing that culture. Well, that expression, building cultures of peace.
Mhm. Thank you, JJ.
Suzanne?
Yes, I just wanted to share about a conversation I had this week. The Nelson Public Library, I'm not sure if anybody on here is from Nelson, has had a program going for a couple of years called From the Heart. And it's just inviting people from the community to come and sit in circle. They have the Aboriginal educator from the high school comes and facilitates. And it's just about people learning how they can become more informed. What are their responsibilities about taking action toward a better future, and how to contribute to building a culturally safe and courageous circle of belonging. And so I thought that I would tell this group about it because I think it's something that we could do here in Grand Forks, like the Peace Cafe, but different. Reading books, that we could get book sets and all read about different topics that will just inform us better about Indigenous culture and what's happening and what the language, how to use the language to just be better people in the circle. And so I just thought I'd throw that out because I think that's something that we could do here in Grand Forks.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, Lizanne, because one thing that we wanted to achieve with the Peace Cafe was not just to have it as an event once a month, but what could we actually work on in between? What could we learn in between each Peace Cafe? I think COVID has made that a little bit difficult, because it is difficult to have these kind of conversations sometimes on Zoom.
Mhm.
But I really like that idea, and I'm wondering if there even could be some kind of collaboration with that too. When a certain topic is being discussed, can we open it up at the Peace Cafe? I don't know. It's certainly something to talk about. But I see that just from this, I was busy writing down what you said, Judy, and we certainly can practice all of these things that she said, just in our individual relationships and who we meet when we're out in the street. Yeah.
I just want to talk about a little bit about the power of listening to people's stories. I think that is something that is very, very important. Judie shared stories with us, and she told stories about others. And sometimes stories happen not over 35 years, but in an instant. I remember being in a classroom with a woman from Uganda, and she was caught up she was a university student, and Idi Amin's soldiers came and attacked the women, and she was being attacked in the worst ways imaginable. And she looked into the face of the man who was assaulting her, and she asked him a question about his wife or his mother, and it changed everything. So she actually looked into the face of this person who was so violent with her and didn't see her as a human being even, and she saw his humanity. And years later, she was working with that man and other soldiers who wanted to change their lives. And that story has stayed with me. for almost 20 years from the time that I heard it. And it was so incredibly powerful that what that woman achieved in an instant of seeing the humanity in another person who was being so violent. So yes, it takes many, many years to practice these things. And sometimes when we're fortunate enough, our hearts are open and change happens. But unfortunately, nothing comes easy.
It's an amazing story. So touched. She saw his troubled soul, like even amidst that, reached out to him, like amazing, the unconditional love and how to make change. I have to say thank you to Judie for all your beautiful stories and wisdom, and everyone sharing. It's really wonderful to be a part of all of this. Thank you.
Many years ago, when I first became involved with the Baha'i group, I experienced a consultation around a table where we all sat around in a circle and discussed a topic. And a little while after that, I had an opportunity to work in the museum field in which I'm in, at a kind of a gathering that had never existed before. And it was to be in Kelowna, and the Kelowna manager wanted to host it, and I wanted to host one as well. And we discovered each other, so we said, let's do it together. And he took everybody north of Kelowna and asked them to come, and I took everybody south of Kelowna, from Princeton to Grand Forks, and invited them to come. The fellow in Kelowna was very organized, and he said, since he was the host, he said, I'll take the morning, you can have the afternoon. So in the morning when we walked in, all the chairs were lined up like a classroom, and there was a desk at the front. And I don't tell this to criticize him, it's just a description. And it was his personal style. He sat at the table and he talked all morning about the potential of what we could do as a museum group. And then we had lunch, and then during lunch, I arranged all the chairs in a circle and took the tables away. And there were 30 people there. And so I invited somebody to begin and just to go around the circle one at a time and say what they were doing at their place. Well, within 2 hours, we had generated the idea of a unified brochure that would be printed and distributed in every museum in the region that shared information about all the museums. This was for tourism. And we figured out how we were going to pay for it, who was going to do it, and the whole thing. And at the end, in the meantime, we also discussed many other things and shared. At the end of the meeting, when we had this thing completely organized, which had never existed before, the fellow from Kelowna came up to me and said, Kyler, how did you do that? And my thought was, I put chairs in a circle and invited people to share, knowing that everybody that was there was respectful, and they were, and they were all creative people. And it was an example of the power of group thinking and respecting each other, and tangible results can come out of that kind of thing.
Plus, it's kind of more fun, isn't it? Than the old classroom.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And in that case, it was incredibly practical because there were tiny museums that had no money. There were big museums that had big budgets. We were all sitting around together. The old way was the big places would get big ads, the small places would get small ads. We decided that through our discussions, the tourism audience doesn't care. They just want to see stuff. And so we decided that in the brochures, every institution would have exactly the same size of space. And we would just say the name, the place, and a little bit about just a couple of words about what was there. And it was all equal. And there were a couple of museums, Grand Forks being one of them, that wasn't in attendance. And we decided the tourists don't care. Everybody should be in it. So we included everybody. There was no charge for those. And the rate to buy in was $25 for the poorer places and $100 to $150 for the big places. And everybody agreed. It was a consultation that led to unanimous consent and benefited everybody. So it was just so fun to see the possibility that that kind of approach can actually be practical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's an approach where you're looking for solutions that benefit everybody, not what's just best for you, which seems to be a key part of a good consultation.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have a story to tell? A comment? Maybe Michael's cat.
Hi,
It's a lovely tail there. Okay. Is
can
that
anyone hear me?
Kim?
Oh, yeah. Last time my Zoom didn't work, so I wasn't sure if my voice was gonna work.
You're on.
Okay. I just caught a little bit, I'm not fully present with this, but I'm catching some nice peace reminders. And I really resonated when Lizanne mentioned from the heart circle in Nelson, some kind of space cultivating a safe circle of belonging, and possibly having something like that in Grand Forks. And I just wanted to say that I have energy to help just to put towards that, if anyone else, or if Lizanne is interested too, that I definitely have energy for that.
Nice.
There.
And thank you also for this. Natasha invited me, and yeah, I'm just casually kind of like listening. I've got other things in the background here, but thank you so much. Really, really heartfelt and appreciated.
My pleasure.
If I could just say to Kim, I think that would be great. I would love to connect with you. I think we're friends on Facebook, so maybe I'll shoot you a message and see what we can get going.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thanks.
Okay. Can I ask if while everyone is here, are there topics that you're interested in having at future peace cafes? We've covered quite a range, but they're all directed towards creating peaceful societies, a peaceful planet. Maxine, you might want to say something about next month's Peace Cafe.
Yes, for sure. We have Bill Dunwoody, who is the coordinator of Rotary District 5080. That's a Canada-US club of which Grand Forks is a member of. He will be presenting on Rotary's peace building clubs and the history of Rotary and peace, and the direction that they're going in right now, and all the programs that they do run in that whole context, from peace assemblies to peace ambassadors. They actually do actively recruit people who already have, I think it would be at least a BA, to apply if they've worked in the field of mediation or even volunteering in not-for-profit situations, you know, where they've had some success, to apply for a peace scholarship. And they would then attend one of 5 universities in 5 different continents at their own choice and be paid have their tuition paid to complete their master's in peace studies. And they don't have to be Rotarians, but the idea is that they would be able to be more effective in whatever role they take in through their lifetime in terms of initiating and supporting peaceful endeavors. So anyway, he's coming to be our speaker in April. And just so everybody knows here, our Rotary Club has now been designated as a peace building club within our District 5080. And so we definitely have done some partnership with some of the organizations here tonight and look forward to even doing more in the future.
Judy, do you have something to say about that, your experiences in bringing, diverse groups together to work on one common objective? Because we're certainly looking at trying to collaborate here in Grand Forks.
Just say that Michael and I are Rotarians as well. We're District 5360, which is the southern part of Alberta. And we belong to the Cochrane Rotary Club, which is just outside of Calgary. And one of the initiatives that, well, we're really looking at trying to do things in a different way than maybe traditional Rotary clubs too. And so we have a whole action group that's working on Indigenous partnerships and relationships. It's actually not easy. It's controversial in some Rotarians. The whole idea of really having a focus on Indigenous people is controversial. But we've also been undergoing a process of really understanding our community better. Rotary often supports different organizations within the community that are doing good work. But we're starting to ask the question, for example, we can give money to the food bank, but why do people need the food bank? Like, what's going on in our community that people need the food bank? And so the process of asking those hard questions and really getting to know the community demographics and vulnerabilities and strengths in a whole different way in order to work at a level that is much deeper than just writing a check, but also that is really bringing together people and organizations that aren't Rotarians and really building up those partnerships to work together. So that's and like we say, it's not easy, but I think it's the way we have to go.
Our collaborations and partnerships in all endeavors in our communities are really critical.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure. I appreciate your thoughts and your sharing on that too, Judy.
Yeah, it's a learning process. And I think that we need to have that conversation within, not just within Rotary, but within Rotary about how clubs are doing that.
Yeah, I know our District 5080 is really moving forward with that aspect between clubs too, but it really is about our own communities as we move forward, and then we can move outward.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to the time when Lizanne's going to have to start thinking about the library closing. Are there any other comments, or we do have a few minutes if anybody's got anything else they'd like to say or offer? No. Well, we've got lots we can think about and things we can work on. And Certainly the world situation, I think, is making us all think more deeply about peace and what we can do.
Absolutely. Michael, you're muted.
Yeah, I just want to recount something that happened. Well, I heard on CBC just the other day. They were interviewing at the Polish border at Lviv as they were receiving Ukrainian refugees coming across. And this woman came from somewhere else in Poland, I think. And she was being interviewed, and she said, and the interviewer said, "So what are you doing here?" And she said, "Well, a few days ago, we were just sitting in my apartment with some friends, and we realized that we needed to do something. So then we started a humanitarian organization on Monday, and this was Wednesday. We started a humanitarian organization on Monday, and then we got 5 trucks loads full of food and blankets and clothes, and now we're here. And I've been here a day. I slept on the floor of somebody's hotel room last night. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight, but we're here and we're doing our best." Now that's, to me, like, that's a rising and moving from talk to action. I think it's in the sphere of action that a lot of the learning that we need to do to get better at changing the world can happen. I think we can talk about the principles and the ideas only, and it only works to a certain degree, and then we have to practice. And so if we're in a regular circle of people, like in the Baha'i community, for example, we have a process of consultation, of decision-making that's described in our writings and in our guidance that says the first thing you have to do is pray and turn your mind and your heart to the Creator. Because then you rise above your own selfishness, you're trying to move into a space where it's service above self. And then the next thing you do is you figure out what you're really talking about, any issue that you're talking about. And then you try to identify, well, what are the really important spiritual principles that are behind how that would guide us in how to act in this particular situation. And then you try to apply those principles, and then you get the facts in the situation, and you come down eventually to a decision, and then you decide what you're going to do. There's always action at the end of this. It's always oriented to action. And then you have to set out and try that action in the world, because you don't actually know if your action is going to work until you try it. It's kind of like a theory of change, that your decision is a theory of change. It's like a doctor's prescription to a patient is a theory that if I give you this medicine, you're going to get better, but maybe not. So come back and see me in a week. And if it doesn't work, come back and see me right away. It's the same thing with a collective decision-making process. You got to test it. And you can't test it if after the decision is made, people start still arguing about whether that was the right decision or not. And some people go this way and some people go that way. You have to maintain that unity of the circle when you're trying out the decision. So that discipline of being in a group that follows those kind of protocols or rules, you could say, ground rules, over a long time, causes anyone to have to switch gears when you enter into a collective process to try to make the world better, where you're oriented to humility and to learning and to good outcomes for others. And what I find so interesting is that kind of protocol, I mean, that's not really particularly unique to the world. And Indigenous people, certainly Canadian Indigenous people and Maoris, have practiced this kind of internal rules that tell a person how they're supposed to think and how they're supposed to act when they're working together. So I guess my kind of comment about all of this is that if we make circles of people that are actually oriented to action and then practice the kind of loving humility and service-oriented caring, we practice that dynamic together, we're going to get better at it, especially if we're oriented to the kind of learning that goes action, reflection. We're trying to learn how to do what we're doing better. We try something, see if it works. Try something, see if it works. And always getting back and reflecting. So because basically there's 18 million people, 18 million NGOs in the world. 18 million NGOs in the world. That means hundreds of millions of people working for a better world. But if you add them all up, what they're all doing, it's still not pushing back the Russia and Ukraine conflicts of the world, or the all the other kinds of the darkness that we see around us. So we need to get better at what we're doing. We're not that good at it yet. And if we can humble ourselves and apply ourselves in a way to a discipline of being in groups and learning together, we can accomplish a lot more, I think.
We have a perfect example of that. And it's not in a religious setting, but it was a work setting. And it was at the grist mill at Karameus, which I operated for many years. And I came into operating historic sites and such as a craftsman. I wasn't used to working with people, and especially not managing people. I worked alone. And all of a sudden I had staff, and mostly summer student staff. And what I've discovered was the beginning month, June was paradise. It was the honeymoon period. And then July would get a little bit tighter. And by August, there were conflicts starting to develop between certain people. Somebody would be identified as not fitting in the group by the group somehow. And I had, as the manager, I had to resolve the problems. And I really didn't like having to do that. I just thought, why can't people get along? Come on. But they became familiar issues each year. And I had an experience once where I was in a job where we were constantly learning the whole time. And learning was about 40% of our time, and 60% we applied what we learned. And there were 3 of us working as a team, and each time one of us went out to take a course, we were in different disciplines. We'd share that learning when we came back with the other 2. So we were constantly learning. Well, that particular team maintained the honeymoon period for the whole year that we worked together. And we couldn't wait to get to work in the morning because it was such a beautiful experience, because all the learning was practical. It was what we could apply to the job, to our personal jobs. And the group development meant we worked together. We found ways we could work collaboratively to help on some things with what resources we had. Well, I decided to bring that format to this operation at the grist mill of constant learning. I didn't tell the staff what was going on. I just said that I wanted everybody in the main building, in the tea room, at 9 o'clock, and we would discuss the day, just to make sure we knew the schedule, when's the bus tour coming, who's going to get lunch when. And the cook said, oh, I don't have time for that. I've got to make soup. And I was insistent. I said, no, everybody out here. Well, I would put up one topic each day for group discussion. And sometimes at the beginning, it was just mechanics, learn to run the cash register, or how are you going to greet visitors? And what I found was the cook, who didn't want to be there in the first place, became one of the most creative souls. So she showed up the day the question was posed, how should we greet visitors? Because I knew some people were shy and others were not, as front desk workers. And Hazel came in and she said, I've been thinking about your question. And as I drove down the road this morning, I thought, why don't we say, welcome to the grist mill? And then we can see if they understand us or not. We can assess whether they speak English or not. And the common thing was in businesses everywhere, or any kind of greeting, hi, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? And my approach was, we've only got a few seconds here, why waste them? So let's deal with that first thing. Well, it turned out welcome to the grist mill was absolutely perfect, because we could then assess, do these people speak English or not, and where would it go? But it was appropriate. So here was a solution coming from the cook that was the perfect thing for the front desk. Well, I dealt with every physical thing I could imagine, including how to run a fire extinguisher. So we set little fires outside and everybody took a turn. And that was one morning's learning session. After a while, I ran out of things to learn that we shared. And so it became a discussion in general, but I would only bring one topic each day for discussion. Well, what happened was the staff began to show up early, because this group discussion they got to know each other just by talking about one topic. And friendships began to develop, and the great majority began to show up 10 minutes and 15 minutes and a half hour early, unpaid time, just to have a chat and have coffee and chat with their friends. Well, after a month, that was happening. And in the second month, I found at 5 o'clock, the staff was gathering in the tea room to help the tea room lady finish off so she could go home at 5 with everybody else. And she always had lots of work. So the staff began to come in and say, Hazel, what can I do to help you get done today? When they all got finished, they would go down to the picnic tables and sit and have a coffee together and chat. And the chat would be for a few minutes, and then it grew so it was 10 minutes, and then it got up to a half hour and longer. And I thought, wait a minute, this is approaching 6 o'clock. You should be going home. And I wondered if I'd created a monster.
We might have to watch the time here too.
Okay, yeah.
The
In any-
library, that's a good story.
Well, in any case, I wondered if I'd created a monster, but in fact, it created itself, and it all came out of the equal consultation around a circle, and everybody, even the shy ones, began to contribute. And so the practice works, and trying it out, evaluating it, does it work or not? What do we do? Well, that one worked magnificently. And I had learned about the process through sitting around a Baha'i table talking about things.
Yeah. Thanks for that contribution, Kyler. We better let Lizanne go. I think we went well right over time, right up to 8 o'clock. So it was a great conversation. Did you have some closing remarks, Linda? Just
to thank Judie again. Thank you very much for sharing all your stories, and thank you for beginning, and thank you, Michael, for joining us there too. And thanks, really, what we have tonight is a very a group that is from many different places, not just Grand Forks, and it's very nice to have open doors to all the communities in BC this way. So, and Alberta, of course.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, lovely to see Judie and Michael back again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.